Welcome to Can AI Auto-Generate and Run Automated Test, presented by Applitools. Our speakers today are Anand Bagmar and Rizel Scarlett. Anand Bagmar is a software quality evangelist with more than 20 years in the software testing field. He is a contributor to the Selenium project, speaks at conferences and events across the globe, and has built a number of open source tools related to software testing. Rizel Scarlett is a developer advocate at GitHub with responsibility for GitHub Copilot, GitHub Education, GitHub Codespaces, GitHub API, and GitHub Pages. She moonlights as the director of programs at G Code House, an organization aimed at teaching women of color to code.
Thank you, Pam. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. I'm very excited to be sharing the stage with Rizel. There's so much I'm looking forward to learn from her, and I'll tell you what and why. So I've been in this testing space now for more than 20 years, played various different roles in the journey, product and services organizations around the world. As Pam mentioned, I've also built various open source tools related to testing. I'm a very small contributor on the Selenium and the Appium project as well. But one thing that I've always struggled with, and I'm going to admit a limitation of mine, but that's the part of learning, right? I have never understood the JavaScript stack. I have tried. I have failed miserably the first time. I did not fail as miserably the second time. But now, this is a third opportunity for me where I am working on this one cool project with Rizel. But unfortunately, it's a React app which I have never worked on. I'm new to the team. And I believe Rizel has some tests already automated over there using Playwright, right? I've heard that word before. So Rizel, I want to use this opportunity to learn more about you, of course, because looking forward to working with you, but also help me, how can I really learn this application better? How can I understand these tests better? And let's not do it the traditional way. Let's see if there are any modern ways, modern techniques, modern tools. I think AI is pretty popular these days, right? So maybe we could put in a bit of AI in this, and we can learn, if you can help me learn something interesting. Over to you, Rizel.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love that. So I will really quickly, I'm going to introduce myself. I might do like about 10-ish minutes explaining what GitHub Copilot, or the AI tool that Anand was referring to, and then we're going to go in and check out the application that's built in JavaScript and write some tests in it. It's so hilarious that you said that JavaScript, you took you some time to understand it, because on the flip side for me, Java, I can never tell what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and this slide deck, again, should take about just 10 minutes. I just want to make sure people get an understanding of what GitHub Copilot is and how it works. So really quickly, as mentioned, my name is Rizel Scarlett. I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. And if you wanted to connect with me, you can find me at Black Girl Bytes on any social media platform. But let's get into what GitHub Copilot is. It's an AI peer programmer that helps you to write code faster with less work. And just to expand on that, so far, it's helped redefine the productivity for millions of developers by introducing them to the magic of AI assistants. It's a cloud-based artificial intelligence tool that was developed by GitHub and OpenAI to assist users of Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, NeoVim, and JetBrains by essentially suggesting lines of code and whole functions instantly. With Copilot, you can do something like write a regular expression or interact with an API for the first time without leaving your editor. Or in our case, probably write a couple of tests, even if you don't have knowledge of the actual language. So if you're struggling to really imagine how GitHub Copilot works, the user experience is very similar to the Smart Compose feature in Gmail. So as you can see in this screenshot, or if you've ever used Gmail, you start typing and it tries to predict what you might say. Here in the screenshot, we see someone writing to Jacqueline about Taco Tuesday, and they say, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. And the predictive text is saying, and I hope you're doing well. That is the same experience, but with code. Is it magic, right? A lot of people wonder, is this like some kind of magical thing? How does it read my mind? But we use the terms AI peer programmer and Copilot to imply that this tool can't work without you, the developer. It's not magic, obviously, it's technology, and it can't read minds, although it can feel like it. But what's really happening is by sharing code completion suggestions based on your project's context and style conventions, GitHub Copilot is increasing your velocity and confidence as a programmer. So what's happening behind the scenes, if it's not magic, is it's using some tools, some LLMs or large language models by OpenAI. When GitHub Copilot first launched, it was using something called OpenAI Codex. And Codex is a machine learning model or a LLM that translates natural language into code. It's a version of GPT-3. And if you've heard like GPT-3, GPT-4, and you're like, what is that? Why are people saying that? That stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3. And GPT-3 was originally made to use deep learning to produce human-like text. So like different products like Duolingo actually use GPT-3 for grammar correction. But then they made Codex, which is like a descendant of GPT-3, and that was specifically fine-tuned for programming. Most recently, we switched over from Codex to a different model that's still owned by OpenAI called Sahara Base, or fondly known as ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo. And the reason we switched over to this is because it optimizes for response quality, latency, and also the compromises around cost. For us, it is expensive to run GitHub Copilot. We need the most expensive GPUs to be able to run this. Not only is it expensive, but it's hard to find. So we had to be able to figure out like, how can we still create or produce quality for our developers without like breaking the bank and struggling to find GPUs. So what this new model does is it allows us to have like a better time to deliver response, so it doesn't ruin your flow, and it gives better responses because we measured based on like the suggestions delivered, suggestions accepted, and the percentage of code written by AI. Just so people can see how it may work, like what is being used on the back end. If you went to OpenAI's Playground, you can get a chance to play around with some of the tooling they have. Here's an example of this movie to emoji converter, where it gives us some examples of like, okay, Back to the Future, the movie, it gives us a young man, an old man, a car, and a clock. But if we were to try it out for Star Wars and press submit, it gives us a star, a rocket ship, and a satellite. And if we were to try out a different example, like The Devil Wears Prada, let's see what it would give us. It gives us like someone dancing in a dress, lipstick, and heels. So that is like the technology that we're using behind the scenes. And you might be saying like, oh, or just how intelligent it could be. You might be saying, okay, this is not code. But in the next slide, we'll see that if I wrote a comment of something like write a binary search algorithm, it is able to actually generate the code and the comments for that. So that's what we're using behind the scenes to make GitHub Copilot work. I like to put that out there for everyone, just because sometimes people are like, it's currently taking my code, and that's not what's happening. It was previously trained on public code from OpenAI's models. And okay, so just an explanation or like a summary. So basically your editor is providing context to Copilot. GitHub Copilot uses that OpenAI LLM and GPT behind the scenes. Then it returns suggestions to your editor, and then you can choose whether to accept or ignore those suggestions. And GitHub Copilot is providing context from your local files. It's not attached to a repository, and it actually, for Copilot for Business, shares data in an ephemeral way. It's shared just long enough enough for GitHub Copilot to provide a suggestion, but we don't take that code for Copilot for Business and we don't put it back into the data model for suggestions. And again, it's available for the following IDEs: Visual Studio, NeoVim, VS Code, and JetBrains. Just really quick, some of the features: you get to the ability to convert comments to code, you get to be able to auto-fill repetitive code, and you get a chance to see alternatives. So if you don't like the initial suggestion that GitHub Copilot gave you, you can hover over that initial suggestion and you can see alternative suggestions as well. Here's a few examples, but we won't stay too long on these because we're going to jump into a real application of our own. But this example is basically I write a comment that says validate a phone number. And instead of me searching the web and taking 30 minutes to an hour, which is honestly how long I take to figure out how to write a regular expression, embarrassingly, instead of that, this took me like maybe 30 seconds to just type a few little bits of code. Maybe I wrote the word fun for function or let to declare the variable, but Copilot did the rest. Also, as we know, a lot of people here are probably testers. Unit testing is vital to every project. It helps to ensure that new changes to an application don't break existing functionality. But writing unit tests can be time-consuming, tedious, and many times developers, including myself, are not really well trained on how to write good test cases. And then on top of that, software engineering teams don't always incorporate the time that it will take to write unit tests for their ticket work. But GitHub Copilot actually excels at this. In this example, the colored lines are what the person or what we actually wrote, and the gray lines or the ghost text is what GitHub Copilot suggested. So GitHub Copilot essentially wrote out all the test cases to test when a book has a full title but no subtitle, or it returns a title and a subtitle. And you know, I think I want to just jump into the actual like code right now. And if we want, I'll go back to the rest of this. Actually, just one thing I want to talk about that people have like questions about. So will your code be shared? Again, for Copilot for Business, your code is never stored at rest. It persists only long enough to produce a suggestion. Consequently, your code is not and cannot be used to improve model quality. Another question that people often have is like, does it suggest insecure code? It can, right? Public code may contain insecure coding patterns, the code that it was trained on, insecure coding patterns, bugs, or references to outdated APIs. But we did come up with a couple of solutions. And I go back to this, right? So we came out with an AI-based vulnerability prevention system that blocks insecure coding patterns in real time to make GitHub Copilot suggestions more secure. Our model targets the most common vulnerable coding patterns, including hard-coded credentials, SQL injections, and path injections. However, I still encourage folks to review the code that GitHub Copilot suggests, just as you would with a coworker or somebody else that you're collaborating with. You would review their code. Do the same for an AI. And okay, you might see in the demo that like maybe I type something and it's not what I expected. The code that GitHub Copilot generates is not always the same. Generative AI and tools like GitHub Copilot are non-deterministic, meaning I can't determine their output. I can only do different things to make sure or to try to get that same output. So I have a couple of tips and tricks that I'll share later on. So I hope you all kind of got an understanding of what GitHub Copilot is. I'm going to jump into the actual code and the actual project that we built. So what we have here is a simple to-do list. Actually, so basically you can type in what you want to do. So my to-do list for today is to run a webinar with Applitools. So you can add things very simple. You could delete them, etc., etc. But what I did actually, just because I wanted to have a little bit of fun last night, I added some additional functionality where if you expand on the task, it'll break it down into subtasks for you and let you know how long an actual task might take. So going on a 2-mile jog, it says like, make sure you have your attire set out for 5 minutes, take a shower, all of that other stuff. This is helpful for me because I do have ADHD and I struggle with figuring out how long something's actually going to take me. But now we want to actually write some tests for it. As Anand said, he's not familiar with JavaScript and he's not too sure how he can write tests for this. The good thing is we have GitHub Copilot, which can help us. I've actually used it to learn a lot of languages like Python and P5.js. So we're going to try to do the same thing here. Give me a quick second. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to tell it I want to import the Playwright package for us. So import Playwright. Let me zoom in just a little bit more for you all just to make sure. And maybe I want to say I want to import test and expect from Playwright. And let's see what it does. There we go. It knew exactly what I wanted to do. Next thing I want to do, I do want to create a test suite, but because it's non-deterministic and I'm nervous about demoing, I'm actually going to give it my own prompt saying test that I want to test that this shows up, the H1 of timeline. So I'm going to say test that it has an H1 with the text. Okay, that was a nice try. Not my app, but timelines. Let's see what it does for us. Okay. And I missed the paren that it was giving me. And cool. Let's see if that actually works out. And then one last test that I want to do is just test that it has a button. Oh, not with the text start. That was also a nice try. But what we want to test is that the button says add task. Okay. And it also tried to guess the local host URL. That's not actually it. This is why you do have to just double check and review, although it does help to accelerate your speed and also helps you to look at the syntax. Because maybe I didn't know the syntax for this. Anand said he's not familiar with JavaScript. So it helps lead us in the right direction, but you do have to make sure, like, wait a minute, this might be wrong. Okay, so what we can do is go ahead and just run this really quickly and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we'll go ahead and edit certain parts of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do npm test to run our test suite. And it might fail, it might not. Oop, and it looks like it did fail. So maybe not to have selector is the right one. What we might want to say is to have text. And I'm going to just go ahead and switch this up just a bit, but it did lead us in the right direction. Okay, to have text. And I think I want to do the same thing here. So instead, we're going to do page locator. The other thing I could have done is when it gave me that initial suggestion, I could have hovered over it and seen what other suggestion it was going to give me. That might have been the best solution here. But let me go ahead and run npm test again. And all right, both of those tests pass. Anand, just going to check in with you. I went over a lot. Did that make sense to you?
It does. And you know what? Maybe I do not need to learn JavaScript.
Maybe you don't.
Yeah. No, this is super cool, Rizel. This is fascinating how quickly we are able to generate tests on an application that is there. Yeah. I guess I just need to learn to ask the right question, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. I call it prompting, or that's what I've seen people calling it. And that's really key to working with some AI tools, is knowing how to ask the questions. This is similar to like when we learn to code, learning how to Google properly to get the right results.
Awesome. So this is great, Rizel. I do have a question, right? So end-to-end tests or component tests are great, but there's a lot of assertions that we need to write. It would be great if we can integrate Applitools Visual AI as part of this. Can GitHub Copilot do that as well?
Yes, actually, what I do want to show is we have a we have a way to do this. All right, so I'm gonna just zoom in a little bit here. We have an additional tool or additional tools coming out under the suite of Copilot X. One of them is called Copilot Chat. And Copilot Chat is very similar to the experience that you'll get in ChatGPT, if people are familiar with that. The biggest difference here is that it's baked into your IDE. And this is great because, one, you don't have to leave your IDE to go on the browser. As someone with ADHD, first thing I do, I leave, go to my browser, all of a sudden I'm on Twitter or YouTube instead. And then in addition to that, it has context of your actual like code base, the files that are opened, rather than in ChatGPT, sometimes you have to keep explaining. So let's go ahead and ask Copilot Chat for help with adding in Applitools test. And give me a quick second. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, how do I add Applitools eyes to the test for visual validation? Let's see what it gives us. Okay, awesome. And it looks like it's going to try to walk me through all of the things that I should do. So it's starting with make sure I install the Applitools package. So I guess I'll try that out. This looks a little different than last time. And since you're more familiar with Applitools, do I need to do the WebDriver or just Applitools eyes? I just want to make sure.
It's not the WebDriver. You need to tell it probably you're using Playwright, right?
Oh, yes. Cool. That's true. Let me just make sure that. Thank you. And that's about like making sure you ask the right questions. I'm using Playwright. Okay. It should usually have context here, but as I said, it's non-deterministic, so different things happen. There we go. Thank you. All right, so we have the right command that I need to run. Really cool thing, if you press these little like 3 dots here, you can actually get the option to run it in your terminal. So it'll just pop it in right here and it'll start running, which is cool. So it installed those, and I'm gonna go ahead and like copy these lines, the import as well. So I'm gonna do that, and I'm going to put the eyes in, and my API key is going to be Applitools API key. Actually, this is totally a side note, but something I wanted to show people. I'm using something called GitHub Codespaces, where it gives you an IDE in your browser. But one of the cool things that I really like about this is that you can save API keys within something called Codespaces secrets, rather than having a .m file. I actually think when I came on Applitools webinar last year, I accidentally exposed my API keys. So I like storing them in the secrets and variables section for Codespaces here instead. That way, I never expose that file. I don't need to open it. There's no way I can accidentally click it or view it. It's just stored within this environment, and I can just refer to it here as process.m.applitools API key. Next thing I want to do after that, it's telling me, is now I can switch this to eyes.test. And let's see, I think I have a different implementation of this that I know works. As we said, like sometimes Copilot does different things, and I would prefer to do the one that we know works. I think we're missing a parent. Okay, or not. Let's see. Oh, and maybe another. All right, there we go. So we've switched this over to use Applitools instead of just Playwright, or we integrated Applitools here, so we can still test if that H1 says that says the words time blind, and we can still test Oh, actually, now we added this test that it suggested from us, is to check if that button has the text add task and if we can actually add a task. So I'm going to add this here too. I'm going to pop it in. And we might see that it works. We might not see that it works. And we might be able to debug together, because I don't know Applitools, but I'm just leaning on Copilot for help. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll see what failed and what doesn't fail and why. npm test. And we'll see that I probably shouldn't have added this. Let's see what happens instead. Let me save it. And npm test.
Yeah, this I can tell you what it means. You have to say eyes.open for every test.
Eyes.open for every test?
Do that over here.
Maybe I didn't do it for that second one, right?
Correct.
There we go. And GitHub Copilot is already saying, like, wait a minute, I think you wanted to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And let's hope that this works. So we have await eyes.open, timeline adds a task. All right, fingers crossed. Okay, I'm going to cancel this and try one more time. What languages does GitHub Copilot support? Does it also support Python? Yeah, so it supports all the major languages: Java, C#, C, Python, Ruby, TypeScript. It can work for even niche languages. It's just that it'll have a larger sample size for the more popular languages. So maybe COBOL or something like that might not work as well, but it supports all of those. So we got one passing test, but one failing test. And I guess it detected differences in the H1. So if we go on over to Applitools, we'll see what worked and what didn't work. And this is saying that the adding a task button worked, but I think that there was just some changes in the H1. Correct me if I'm wrong or not, that it didn't expect.
That is correct. So if you click on that thumbnail, you will see the baseline and the screenshot that was captured. Okay. Press the letter S on your keyboard.
Okay, S.
There we go. Okay.
Gotcha, because there was a loading.
Exactly. Gotcha. The baseline had that, but what you see as part of your test is the right behavior. So now what you would do is do a thumbs up on that screen.
Thumbs up.
Exactly, and say done, continue. And you have to also hit the save button over there on the right-hand side.
Gotcha, there we go.
So now the baseline is updated. Next time you run the test, it's going to expect the correct behavior.
Awesome, cool. Should I run it again or are we good?
We could run it again, but this is fascinating, right? Because very quickly, you were able to integrate Applitools with the test, which were non-existent about 10 minutes ago. Yeah. And we got that integrated very quickly. Now, the next challenge that I'm going to have is I need to make sure the application works correctly on all the supported browsers. So we have an Applitools Ultrafast Grid that can be used to scale this. Could we maybe ask Copilot if it can integrate that?
Yes, we can. And I'm going to go over there and ask that question. So I'm going to say, how can I integrate Applitools Ultrafast Grid to these tests? And if it's not exact, I do have already some examples. Okay, cool. It gives us kind of a like baseline of what we need to be able to do, but I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste some of the infrastructure we already have, and I'll actually ask it to add more tests to the Ultrafast Grid instead. So give me a quick second to do that. Let me do that right here. Paste. So if we scroll up to the top here, we'll see that we have the Ultrafast Grid already implemented. This I was able to do with the help of you and Copilot Chat earlier. Right now, Copilot Chat is thinking of something else, and I probably could have refined my question a bit more. But what we're going to ask it to do is add a couple more tests just so we can see the power of Copilot. So as we can see, like it has the browser support for Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. It still has those same tests that we had before of adding an H1 and adding a task. I want to see if it can do something like test if it could add 3 tasks, and then also test if it can add or it can delete tasks. So I'm going to say can, and one thing that helps is if you like highlight or have that actual file open so it knows you're referring to that. Can you write a test for adding 3 tasks? Just to see, like, is my application going to break if I have multiple tasks on here? There we go. And what I'm going to do is instead of copying and pasting, I'll insert it right here where the cursor is, adding 3 tasks. We can run this and see what happens. Then I'm going to go ahead and run npm test. Again, we might have the failure of the different changes to the actual application, but let's see what happens. Okay, so it says all tests done. It's printing out a couple of like results for us. And maybe we can even go here and see what's happening. Right now, the to-do is running. One of them just passed, I think, at 11:35, and I'm gonna head back. All right, there we go. All tests actually passed. So I was able to test with Ultrafast Grid on all browsers. If there's an H1 that says time blend, if we were able to add a task, and if we were able to add 3 tasks, we can also go say like, can you add a test or can we test deleting a task? And we're going to be able to just, it's same thing, throw that right in here and be able to run the test again and see that happen. But I won't run that for now.
That is just super amazing how quickly we've been able to get this running. And the beauty is that these are working tests for the application. It's not just dummy code, which you don't know if it's going to work or not, right? I'm guessing we might still need to tweak the test based on the performance of the application, adding intelligent weights or something. But this is so helpful. Thank you for sharing this. I'm enlightened. I'm going to put on my resume, I know JavaScript as well.
Yeah, you're a JavaScript pro now.
But you know what? You've made me greedy now. You've made me greedy. The test is working on local. Yeah. It's as good as saying the test works on my machine or the code works on my machine, right?
That's true.
The truth is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. Can it work in CI as well?
Yeah. And luckily, GitHub has an amazing ecosystem of not only an in-browser ID and not only an AI tool that can help you code. Most people might be familiar, but we have something called GitHub Actions. For folks that aren't familiar with it, this is a tool that allows you to automate anything that's happening within your repo. But what a lot of people use it for, which is amazing, is for CI/CD. So continuous integration, continuous deployment. So whenever you push something or make any changes to production or a certain branch. It can do things like testing or deploying your project to different places. So what I've actually done is I set up 2 GitHub Actions. One that deploys my Next.js site to GitHub Pages. So if you did want to try it out, you can see this on GitHub Pages here. It doesn't have the AI, functionality here, but I have another GitHub action that runs the test for me. So we can take a look at the actual GitHub action workflow. All GitHub actions go in a folder called .github/workflows. This is how it knows that this is something it needs to run or automate. This is like its little trigger. You have to put it in here for it to actually work. So if we look at the YAML that we've written for our GitHub action workflow, we first talk about the name, playwright test. We talk about when it'll be triggered. The first one says on workflow dispatch. So this means you can manually run the action workflow if you wanted, but it'll also run if there's a push that happens to our project or if a pull request is opened. And then there's a couple other things like what type of operating system we want it to run in. We pass in like our API keys that we need for it. Sorry, I just clicked the random thing. And then we tell it like other steps that it needs to do. Like we need to make sure we're using node version 18. We're going to run npm CI, which is like installing the dependencies. We're going to install playwright. And then we're going to go ahead and run the command npx playwright test for it to actually run all of these, and it'll output a playwright report for us. So what we can do is, let's say I'm just going to make a random change to the project. I don't want to do one that'll be too it wouldn't change too much. Maybe I'll just do a console log so that we can see that on a push something will happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a random console log or change the console log here. Error. What could I do? I'm just going to do console log. This is a test. It's a little small. Sorry, guys. And I'm going to go ahead and commit this. Cool. You could use the terminal. You could also use some of these source control toolings. And now what should happen when we go back to our repository, our GitHub action should have been triggered because we made a push. So push, pull request, or you can do it on your own. And yes, it is actually running these playwright tests right now. You can see the logs happening in real time. So if you click in here, you can see first it set up the job. It's running an action called checkout v3. What that does is that's just checking out the files in your repository. It's setting up node for us as well. And it's going to go ahead and install dependencies. This is a great way for you to see if something fails. It'll print out your logs right here so you can figure out what went wrong or what went right. So it's installing Playwright in all the browsers. Cool. Tons of information. And while this is happening, I can just talk about the beauty of being able to run your test within a CI/CD rather than, you can only run it locally. If you're working on a team and you want to make sure that all the changes that are made are not breaking changes, you can be able to just run all of these tests right within your CI/CD or right within GitHub Actions. So now it's going to run the playwright test. And what we might be able to see is in Applitools eyes for some of these to start running once it actually gets started. Cool. So we even see like the values that are being printed out. It says it's running to test that it should have a title. It's running the test that it should load the home page. And just a little patience needed with GitHub Actions sometimes. I think there are ways to optimize the speed for it as well. But we can see right now in Applitools eyes, this is currently running. And it is currently passing some of these tests here. Cool. So all of these are done. We can see there's a check mark, those ran, and it'll just do some cleanup for us and upload the playwright test report. If we refresh here again, we see at 11:42 these passed. So that's how you would be able to integrate GitHub Actions into your tests.
That is super awesome. But you know what? Your latest changes, I was running the test on my local with your changes, and the test failed.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Okay. Let's pair on this. Could I share my screen?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Okay. So I have the test that you ran, and I'm running it, but it failed for a very different reason. I think as part of one of the changes, maybe unintentionally, the locator changed. And because of that, so while the application runs, the test has started running, it failed because of that issue, right? The locator changed and it was not able to interact with that particular locator. And that is a problem which I believe many of us would have faced in the past as well. I'll just wait for it to complete over here to show you the error. But changing of locators is a frequent problem when it comes to doing UI testing, end-to-end testing. And while the functionality of your application might still be working fine, the test is not going to give you the kind of feedback that is required for it. So here we go. This is the error that I saw, right? That the locator has changed. Now, the risk of such issues happening is it puts a blocker on the testing efforts. Everything needs to come to a standstill. You don't get the feedback of quality, of CI. You have to go understand what the issue is, fix the locator after understanding why it has changed in the first place. But fortunately, there is a different way how you could run this. If we use the Applitools self-healing cloud, or rather the execution cloud with self-healing capabilities, what will happen is now, instead of running the test on my local or in the CI in my infrastructure, I'm going to delegate the execution to Applitools, where the test will run in that cloud. And I can take the exact same test that you have written, run it over there, and see the test not just run successfully, also self-heal even though the locator has changed. There we go. In this case, the locator, sorry, this is not the one. This was an earlier test that I had run. Here's the test that is running. It is still running, but we see it's running in the Ultrafast Grid. So we have many different instances of the same test that is going on. While it completes, I'll show you what happens in this case, right? The test has passed, but you see the magic wand over here. And that means there was self-healing capabilities applied to the execution, though the locator has changed. Applitools was able to figure out an alternate locator to continue with the functionality. You click on this wand and you'll see the alternate locator that was used for the test execution to happen. So while we have leveraged all the amazing GitHub tools to implement the test faster, to execute the test, if we leverage the Applitools Execution Cloud, you automatically get the capability of the Ultrafast Grid and self-healing, which is going to make your test even more robust and focus on the validation of your application functionality and not be bothered about what locators are being used or not. And that is the value of the execution cloud with the self-healing capabilities. You could also download the video of the recording in case if you're interested to see what was the flow of the scenario and take decisions based on that as well. This is for offline viewing. So the execution cloud is a great way to complement, and this is again an AI capability. So increasingly, I am seeing more and more AI capabilities that are becoming very valuable assets in the testing and in the test automation space, which can take a productivity X times or hundreds of times higher than where we are right now. and we can get value and focus on validating the quality of your product. Okay, so this was one add-on capability result that I wanted to showcase what we will be able to leverage in our automation efforts. Okay, now I'm going to ask another question to you over here. Many a times, maybe it's just my poor coding practices, right? But the automation that we end up implementing is usually for complex products, right? Not just a task list type of a product. Applications are much more complex, which inherently means the automation framework becomes quite complex as well.
Yeah.
So while we write unit tests for your application code, could you maybe write unit tests for the test framework itself?
Maybe. Let's see. I'm not a testing expert, so I haven't tried that. But we can go ahead and ask Copilot Chat if it could do that. Let's see. And you can tell me if my prompt can be improved. But let's say, can you write test for this? Testing. And what would we call this? Suite or?
Yeah, test suite.
Yes.
We can start with that and refine it based on the answers.
Okay, sounds good. I don't think this is right.
No,
I don't know.
Right. No.
I don't think that Copilot is there yet. And I think this just shows the reality of, but do you think there's something I could say that would be a little bit more
let's try a
specific?
different prompt.
Yeah.
Can you write a test for the Applitools configuration?
Right. A test for and I can't spell, for the Applitools configuration. Let's see. I don't think so. And then sometimes yeah.
Maybe this is actually not a good example, but many a times we actually write a lot of logic in our test frameworks to validate the functionality of your application. And I'm guessing this will definitely be able to. I'm very excited to try this out myself, how it will write tests for some core implementation logic. Maybe our attendees, they have tried something similar. You should put it in the chat if you have tried it.
Yeah, I would love to know. I haven't pushed GitHub Copilot this far because I don't write tests often. So I didn't realize that you all write like tests for the test. I could show other things like one thing that is really awesome is, like you said, that you were new to JavaScript or maybe you didn't understand something. You can highlight lines of code and get explanations for why they're happening. So if you go and highlight this and say Copilot, you can say like, explain this, and it'll go ahead and give you an explanation of why something's happening so you can have more context.
Wow.
And be able to, it's really awesome. You can even ask it random stuff. Like you can say like, explain like NPM or Maven or some other like things that you might need more help understanding. I think this is really good if you maybe are a student or a junior developer on a team and you're a little nervous to ask for help. And then I think another thing that's awesome is the documentation aspect, but I will wait.
No, it's all good. I think that was, now you started reading my mind what I'm getting more greedy about. So go on.
Awesome. Yeah, I could show you. So I guess I have a lot of comments in this one already. So maybe I will document something else. It could do the same thing for a testing suite, but like, let's say we look at some of the code I wrote. This is the back end that generates the API or the AI results for myself. So if I highlight this and I say, I want Copilot to generate docs for this, what this will do is it'll generate JS doc comments. So just explaining what's going on. That way, if you go back to this file and you forgot what happened, or if somebody else does, you'll be able to be like, oh, okay, here's what's going on. So And I think, interesting, it didn't do this last time, but the way that I can press accept, the way that it did the JS doc, so it has like an explanation that, let me zoom in for folks. This is the configuration object for the OpenAI API. This is the OpenAI API instance. And then it talks about the HTTP request object and the response. Interesting. Last time it had a little bit more at the top, but that's okay. Maybe we can try one more file here and see if it can explain the front end of my project. This is just one big file. So let's see, generate docs. And the other thing, let's see, at the top here, cool. Let's see what it gave us. I'll just press accept. At the top here, it kind of explains that this file contains the implementation of a to-do component. It imports the head, use state, use effect, and Web 5 components from their respective packages. It's using the decentralized web network. So it got a pretty good understanding of what I was doing to actually build this out. Even though it's a simple to-do app, it also is implementing different things here. And I know the way that we implemented the test was like I used Copilot Chat and I wrote comments. But another thing you could have done, or we could have done, I just did it because I wanted to control that way, because I wanted to control the situation. Another thing we could have done is do this Copilot and ask it to generate test. So awesome. Those are different stuff.
Yeah. I just thought of another very interesting use case where this may be applicable. I don't know. Okay.
Okay.
The classic problem of documentation is it goes out of sync.
That's true.
So can we ask Copilot to check if the documentation is it valid or not based on the implementation? But that's for another webinar.
Yeah. You know what? That's a really great question. I don't know. That sounds really cool. And that would be amazing. I'm actually, you know what? We actually have, as part of the Copilot X suite, is we have, in addition to Copilot Chat, we have Copilot for CLI, so it'll help you with writing bash commands, but we also have Copilot for Docs, which is coming out. So maybe I haven't gotten a chance to play around with that yet because it's still in development, but maybe that's where it'll do the syncing.
Yeah, it's something to try out.
Yeah.
Awesome. We are getting close to the end, and we definitely want time for to answer any questions that would be there. I just want to ask one last thing, Rizel. These are amazing things that you have shared. A lot of this is probably experimental. We'll need to experiment and figure out how it's going to work for us as individuals. Are there any caveats or fine print that you want to make explicit for people when they go to try this out that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, this should only take me 2 minutes, but one, it can't code full applications yet. A lot of people ask me that, like it can do line by line for you. And then also I've experimented a lot with like how to make sure your suggestions are what you want. And my tips on that are making sure you write clear comments with high-level overviews, continue to iterate on the comments that you create. And another thing is keeping an open tab of 1 to 2 relevant files open. So if you have a file where you like define the function in, and you want to refer to it in another file, just have that file that file open in a separate tab, and it'll be able to give you better results based on that. Another thing I want to talk about is it's not really good for like written prose. I have seen people use it for documentation. Like if they're going to like literally just manually type documentation themselves. But what I think is where it's more effective is if you want to like add a code snippet into your documentation, like you see here, where this person, my friend Hayden Barnes, is like saying, okay, I want to add this command into my documentation, and it allows GitHub Copilot to do that. And then one last thing is I know a lot of people, or a few people, are concerned about like getting public code into their actual code base. Some people are okay with it, some people aren't, depending on like what licenses they're using. You do have the option within the settings for GitHub Copilot to block suggestions matching public code. If you are using Copilot for business, this is automatically turned off for you. And then another thing we're coming out with is a tool or feature that lets you know when 150 characters or more match public code, and will tell you where it matches that. So maybe we found it on Stack Overflow or someone's open source project, and then you can make a more informed decision if you want that code to be in your code base. And it's not that it's taking that code from there, it just may coincidentally match or look similar to that.
Awesome. Very important things you shared for people to be aware of, me especially to be aware of. I'm going to be trying these things out tomorrow. So thank you so much for this. And Pam, over to you. I don't know how much time we have for questions.
So, the first question, or the most upvoted question, is from Depali. Is it possible to generate tests based on API documentation? If yes, does it support Swagger or any such tool to get API definitions?
That is a good question, and not necessarily something that I've tried. My inkling is maybe you won't have the best results with that. You know, I think GitHub Copilot works way better if you give it like smaller amounts of information. So maybe you give it maybe a Swagger API, like one API or like one example, and then say generate a test based off of this. But to copy and paste all of the documentation in there, if you use ChatGPT, too much information sometimes makes it act a little crazy.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing over here. So not sure about, as Rizel mentioned, about GitHub Copilot or any tool, but if you have an open API spec, you can at least auto-generate a lot of relevant contract tests for that API spec automatically. I'm just pasting in chat a link to a tool called Specmatic, which takes an open API spec and it can generate contract tests for you. Of course, it does many more things, but contract tests, at least it can auto-generate.
Awesome.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, the next question is from Michael. Michael asked, are there any prompt engineering best practices or suggestions for AI paired programming?
Yeah, I mentioned a few of them in that slide deck earlier where I said make sure you write high-level detailed comments. But in order for me to not talk too much, I actually wrote a long blog post on this, and I'm going to post it in the chat. So actually, I wrote two of them. So one of them here, and then another one is on the GitHub blog, how to use GitHub Copilot. There we go. Yeah, this is a topic I'm a little too passionate about, and I could talk for an hour. So check out those links.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Natasha asks, can we do any kind of accessibility automation using this?
That is a really good question. I've tried out a little bit, and I will say right now, since GitHub Copilot is still in its early stages, it's a little iffy with it. So it's all about experimentation. It's okay, it's decent, but I would say definitely lean more on yourself and wait till GitHub Copilot continues to evolve as a product.
Okay. But Applitools does have a capability to do contrast validation as part of your visual validations. So definitely check that out. I've pasted the link in chat again. That might be of help.
Ooh.
Excellent. All right, the next question is from Radman. How efficient is Copilot in suggesting design, pattern, specialty cases of end-to-end test to increase the readability and reusability of code? These are important as we're automating a large application with a high test coverage.
Gotcha. Good question. I think in leveraging Copilot Chat, which is that separate extension, it's pretty good at that. For GitHub Copilot proper, I guess, where you just write the comments, its efficiency in anything, whether it's design patterns or code quality or whatever, is based on the quality of code that you write. to be honest. It's going to follow how, if you write bad code, it's going to write bad code. So if you already have like strong design patterns in place, it'll be able to follow that.
Okay. But Rizel, you mentioned that GitHub Chat sits on top of ChatGPT, right?
It doesn't sit on top of it. It just, I was just saying it's similar to it. Yeah.
Similar. Okay, sorry. So I have used ChatGPT to generate automated tests based on specific scenarios. And I was able to ask it questions to say, can you implement this test using a page object pattern, for example? And it gave me a pretty decent implementation of that. Can I use it directly in my automation framework? Answer is 99%, I'm guessing no, because your framework has got different structure, naming conventions, and so on, right? But you can definitely pick up the pieces and put it in your code. And again, of course, tweak it based on application load issues, locators you would not know, you would need to probably update the locators and so on. But it can definitely help. So I've used ChatGPT for that, but I'm going to try out GitHub Chat and Copilot to see if it could generate some of these design pattern-based tests as well.
Yeah. No, thank you for expanding. And just to clarify, I think, yes, Copilot Chat can, but because it's still in beta, so I don't think it's available to every single person. Also, GitHub Copilot itself it's okay with it. Yeah.
Sure. Got it. Okay. I'll ask you to run the prompt for me.
Related to that question, Anand, Justin asked, is the self-healing functionality of Applitools Execution Cloud limited to CI/CD? And then there's also a question from Angela, also about self-healing locators updating when it wasn't desired or expected. So you want to chat a little bit about that?
Sure. So the self-healing functionality is available as part of the Applitools Execution Cloud. Now you could leverage the Applitools Execution Cloud to run your tests from your local laptop, the way Rizel or I ran the tests, or it could be running as part of your CI, which could be GitHub Actions or any other CI tool that you have. But the execution is being pointed to the Applitools Execution Cloud. And that way you will get Execution Cloud and self-healing capability. The second question related to the locators is, I've been a big skeptic about self-healing when it comes to auto updating or using a different locator automatically. And the risk to me is, what if the element itself that you are interacting with has changed? The look and feel has changed, the location has changed, or what if it ends up clicking on a different locator which sort of matched as a next possible one? That's a big risk when it comes to self-healing. The reason I like the Applitools self-healing is because you're tying that together with the visual validation. So even if you have self-healed the locator and you're interacting with it, with the visual validation, you are still going to get the guaranteed validation that yes, everything conforms to what the baseline was, what the expectation was. And hence, it's a very good proposition when you combine self-healing with visual validation. Otherwise, locators changing could be a risk. And I'm hoping, Angela, that was your question. I was able to answer that.
Thank you. And Angela, if you have additional questions, you can definitely reach out to one of our testing specialists. They'd be happy to show it to you and answer those more specifically. All right, it's 6 minutes past the hour. We've got time for one more question. This one is from Andy, and there were a couple questions around this. Can you use Copilot to do TDD as opposed to writing unit test after code has been written? There was also a question about putting in business requirements to generate tests. So Rizel and Anand, I'll let y'all tackle that.
I think that's totally possible as long as your comment has, or whatever prompt you're giving it has enough information for Copilot to generate the code. So I think totally you can like write a comment describing what you want the unit test to do, and it'll generate that code for you. Make sure you edit it and review it. And I think on the flip side, if you have those unit tests opened in a separate like tab, and then you open another file to actually start writing the code, it should be able to take that context from that open file and put it into the actual like functionality of the application.
I'm going to try that out. That's new learning for me. Tomorrow I've got a lot of work cut out for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for a great presentation today. Applitools is on a mission to reinvent every step of the testing process. We are one of the pioneers and leaders in AI-powered automated testing, and we are not stopping. We want to make sure you know that Applitools integrates with all your favorite frameworks and has integrations with so many fantastic tools, including most of the GitHub suite. Our testing specialists are ready to show you what it looks like with your framework and with your environment. There's a link at the top of the chat where you can schedule a demo with one of them. Again, we appreciate your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.